The conference room fell silent as Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell walked in wearing her Navy dress blues. Every eye in the room turned toward her, but not with respect. Whispers followed her like shadows. "There she is," someone muttered. "The woman who thinks she's a SEAL." Another voice added, "Stolen valor at its finest." Sarah had heard all before. For 3 years, she had endured the mockery, the doubt, and the outright hostility from her fellow service members. They called her a fraud, a liar, someone desperate for attention. Her own colleagues questioned everything about her service record. Some even went so far as to launch investigations, certain they would expose her deception. But what they didn't know was that the truth was classified at the highest levels. What they couldn't understand was that some secrets are buried so deep that even the people keeping them forget they exist. And what none of them realized was that in exactly 7 minutes, Commander James Rodriguez was about to change everything they thought they knew about the quiet woman they had spent years tormenting. The real story wasn't about stolen valor or desperate lies. It was about a mission so secret that its very existence had been erased from official records. It was about a team that never officially existed and operations that could never be acknowledged. And it was about one woman's sacrifice of her reputation to protect national security at the highest levels. Sarah took her seat at the back of the room, just as she always did. She had learned to ignore the stares and the whispers. She had trained herself not to react to the accusations, because she knew something they didn't. She knew that sometimes the truth is more dangerous than any lie, and sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones who can never be celebrated. The commander cleared his throat and looked directly at her. For a moment, their eyes met, and she saw something there she hadn't seen in years. Recognition, respect, and perhaps, finally, the courage to speak the truth that had been buried for far too long. "Ladies and gentlemen," Commander Rodriguez began, his voice carrying an unusual weight. "Before we begin today's briefing, there's something I need to tell you about Lieutenant Mitchell. Something that should have been said a long time ago. What follows is the true story of Sarah Mitchell, a story that challenges everything you think you know about honor, sacrifice, and the price of keeping the nation's most dangerous secrets." Sarah Mitchell had always been different. Growing up in a small town in Montana, she was the girl who could outshoot most of the boys by the time she was 12. Her father, a retired Army Ranger, had taught her everything he knew about survival, tactics, and weapons. But more than that, he had taught her about duty, honor, and the sometimes heavy price of serving your country. When Sarah turned 18, she shocked everyone by enlisting in the Navy instead of following her father's path into the Army. She wanted to forge her own way, to prove herself in a different arena. What she didn't know was that this decision would eventually lead her down a path that would test every principle her father had taught her. Boot camp was where Sarah first caught the attention of people she would later learn to fear. She excelled in every category, breaking several records for her division. Her marksmanship scores were perfect, her physical fitness tests were off the charts, and her psychological evaluations showed exactly the kind of mental toughness that certain special programs were always searching for. After boot camp, Sarah was assigned to regular Navy duties aboard the USS Constellation. She served as a weapons specialist, earning commendations for her work and quickly rising through the ranks. Her shipmates respected her, her commanding officers praised her dedication, and everything seemed to be going according to plan. But after 2 years of regular service, Sarah received orders that confused everyone, including herself. She was being transferred to a program that none of her friends had ever heard of. When she asked her commanding officer about it, he simply said it was classified and that she would learn more when she arrived at her new assignment. The orders sent her to a facility in Virginia that didn't appear on any public maps. The building looked like a regular office complex from the outside, but inside, it was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. The security was intense, the atmosphere was serious, and everyone she met spoke in careful, measured tones about missions that couldn't be discussed and operations that didn't officially exist. On her first day, Sarah was brought into a conference room where she met Colonel Patricia Hayes, a woman whose reputation in military intelligence circles was legendary, even though very few people knew her name. Colonel Hayes was tall, imposing, and had eyes that seemed to see right through you. She had spent her entire career working in programs that existed in the shadows, training people for missions that could never be acknowledged. "Lieutenant Mitchell," Colonel Hayes said, reviewing Sarah's file, "you're here because you've demonstrated exactly the kind of skills and mental toughness we need for a very special program. What I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels. You cannot discuss it with anyone outside this facility, including your family, your friends, or even other members of the military who aren't directly involved in this program." Sarah nodded, though she felt a chill run down her spine. She had always known that military service involved secrets, but something about Colonel Hayes' tone suggested that this was different from anything she had experienced before. "We're going to train you for operations that require you to blend in with enemy forces," Colonel Hayes continued. "You'll learn languages, cultural practices, and combat techniques that will allow you to operate independently in hostile territories. The work is dangerous, the training is brutal, and if you're captured, the government will deny your existence." The training that followed was unlike anything Sarah could have imagined. She learned to speak Arabic, Farsi, and Pashto fluently. She mastered combat techniques that went far beyond anything taught in regular military training. She studied cultural practices, religious customs, and social dynamics that would allow her to blend in completely in Middle Eastern societies. But the most challenging part wasn't the physical training or the language classes. It was learning to live with secrets that could never be shared. Sarah was taught to compartmentalize information, to create cover stories that she could maintain under the most intense interrogation, and to separate her real identity from the various personas she would need to adopt in the field. The other trainees in the program were just as carefully selected as Sarah. There was Marcus, a former Marine who spoke 6 languages and had a photographic memory for faces. There was Elena, a Navy intelligence specialist who could hack into almost any computer system. And there was David, an Army Ranger who had already completed 3 tours in Afghanistan and knew the terrain better than most locals. They became a team, but it was a team that could never officially exist. They trained together, lived together, and gradually learned to trust each other with secrets that could get them all killed. But they also learned that their friendship, their loyalty to each other, and even their own identities were secondary to the mission. After 18 months of training, Sarah and her team received their first assignment. They would be inserted into Syria under deep cover, tasked with gathering intelligence on terrorist networks that were planning attacks against American targets. The mission would last 6 months, and during that time, they would have no contact with the outside world and no support from official military channels. Sarah spent her last night before deployment thinking about her father and the principles he had taught her. She wondered if he would be proud of what she was about to do, or if he would be horrified by the deception that her service now required. She decided that serving her country was more important than maintaining her own comfort or even her own identity. The insertion into Syria was carried out through a private contractor that had no official ties to the U.S. government. Sarah and her team were given new identities complete with backstories, documentation, and even fake family histories that would hold up under scrutiny. Sarah became Amira Hassan, a refugee from Iraq who was seeking safe passage to Europe. For 6 months, Sarah lived as Amira Hassan. She worked in refugee camps, attended religious services, and slowly built relationships with people who had connections to the terrorist networks they were investigating. The work was exhausting, emotionally draining, and constantly dangerous. One mistake, one slip in her cover story, one moment where she forgot to maintain her accent or her cultural practices could have resulted in her death and the deaths of her teammates. But the mission was successful beyond their expectations. Sarah and her team gathered intelligence that led to the prevention of 3 major terrorist attacks and the capture of dozens of high-value targets. The information they collected saved thousands of lives and disrupted terrorist networks across the Middle East. When they finally returned to the United States, Sarah expected to receive recognition for her service, perhaps a medal or at least acknowledgement from her commanding officers. Instead, she was told that her mission had never officially happened, that her service record would show only regular Navy duties during the time she was deployed, and that she must never speak about what she had done to anyone, ever. This was when Sarah first began to understand the true cost of serving in programs that didn't officially exist. She had risked her life for her country, had gathered intelligence that saved thousands of lives, and had demonstrated courage and skill under the most dangerous circumstances. But none of it could ever be acknowledged, none of it could ever be discussed, and none of it would ever appear in her official record. Over the next 2 years, Sarah completed 3 more missions in different parts of the world. Each time, she adopted a new identity, learned new languages and cultural practices, and risked her life to gather intelligence that was vital to national security. And each time, she returned to find that her official service record remained ordinary, unremarkable, and gave no indication of the extraordinary things she had accomplished. The psychological toll was enormous. Sarah found herself living multiple lives, maintaining multiple identities, and keeping secrets that isolated her from everyone around her. She couldn't talk to her family about her work, couldn't form close friendships with her fellow service members, and couldn't even seek counseling for the stress she was experiencing because doing so would require her to reveal classified information. But the worst part was yet to come. After her 4th classified mission, Sarah was reassigned to regular Navy duties at Naval Base San Diego. For the first time in 3 years, she would be working alongside other service members who knew nothing about classified operations and had no understanding of the kind of work she had been doing. It was during this assignment that Sarah made the mistake that would haunt her for the next several years. During a casual conversation with some of her new colleagues, someone mentioned the Navy SEALs and their reputation for difficult training and dangerous missions. Without thinking, Sarah commented that she understood something about difficult training and dangerous missions. One of her colleagues pressed her for details, and Sarah, exhausted from years of keeping secrets and desperate for some kind of connection with her fellow service members, hinted that she had experience with special operations. She didn't reveal any classified information, didn't mention specific missions, and didn't claim to be a SEAL. But her colleagues interpreted her comments as a claim that she had been part of SEAL operations. The rumor spread quickly through the base. Within weeks, everyone was talking about the woman who claimed to be a SEAL. Some people were skeptical, others were curious, and a few were openly hostile. The problem was that Sarah's official service record showed no special operations training, no SEAL qualifications, and no indication that she had ever been involved in anything more dangerous than regular Navy duties. When confronted about the rumors, Sarah faced an impossible choice. She could either reveal classified information to defend herself, which would result in her court-martial and imprisonment, or she could allow people to believe that she was lying about her service. The choice was actually no choice at all. Her oath to protect classified information was more important than her reputation. So Sarah said nothing. She didn't confirm the rumors, but she also didn't deny them. She allowed her fellow service members to draw their own conclusions, knowing that most of them would conclude that she was a fraud, a liar, or someone desperate for attention. The accusations began almost immediately. Some of her colleagues reported her to superior officers, certain that she was engaged in stolen valor. Others confronted her directly, demanding that she admit her deception. A few even threatened to expose her publicly if she didn't stop claiming to have special operations experience. Sarah endured it all in silence. She couldn't defend herself without revealing classified information, and she couldn't seek support from the people who knew the truth because doing so would compromise ongoing operations and put other agents at risk. She was trapped by her own integrity and her commitment to protecting national security. The investigation that followed was thorough and humiliating. Military investigators examined every aspect of Sarah's service record, looking for any evidence that she had been involved in special operations. They found nothing, of course, because her real service had been erased from all official records. As far as anyone could determine, Sarah Mitchell was exactly what she appeared to be, a regular Navy weapons specialist who had never been involved in anything more exciting than routine patrols. The investigators concluded that Sarah was either mentally unstable or deliberately lying about her service. Some recommended that she be discharged from the military, while others suggested that she receive counseling for what they assumed were delusions of grandeur. None of them suspected that she was actually telling the truth about having special operations experience, just not the kind that appeared in official records. Sarah's commanding officers were faced with a difficult decision. They couldn't find any evidence that she had actually committed stolen valor, since she had never explicitly claimed to be a SEAL or to have completed SEAL training. But the rumors persisted, and her presence was causing disruption among the other service members. They decided to transfer her to a different base, hoping that a fresh start would allow the controversy to die down. The transfer didn't solve the problem. Somehow, the rumors followed Sarah to her new assignment. Within days of arriving at her new base, people were whispering about the woman who falsely claimed to be a SEAL. The cycle of suspicion, investigation, and humiliation began all over again. This pattern would repeat itself for the next 3 years, as Sarah was transferred from base to base, assignment to assignment, always carrying with her the reputation of being a fraud. She never confirmed the rumors about her special operations experience, but she also never denied them. She simply endured the suspicion, the hostility, and the isolation, knowing that the truth was more important than her own comfort. What made the situation even more difficult was that Sarah genuinely respected the Navy SEALs and would never want to dishonor their reputation or diminish their accomplishments. She knew that real SEALs had earned their trident through some of the most difficult training in the military, and she understood why they were offended by anyone who falsely claimed their achievements. If she could have explained the truth without compromising national security, she would have done so immediately. But the truth was classified at levels that most people didn't even know existed. The program Sarah had been part of was so secret that even many high-ranking military officers were unaware of its existence. The missions she had completed were so sensitive that acknowledging them could compromise ongoing operations and put other agents at risk. So Sarah remained silent, even as her reputation was destroyed and her career was effectively ended. She continued to serve with honor and distinction in her official duties, but she was passed over for promotions, excluded from leadership opportunities, and treated with suspicion by almost everyone she worked with. The psychological toll was enormous. Sarah found herself questioning everything she had done, wondering if her service had been worth the personal cost. She had risked her life multiple times for her country, had gathered intelligence that saved thousands of lives, and had demonstrated courage and skill under the most dangerous circumstances. But none of it mattered now because none of it could be acknowledged. There were times when Sarah considered leaving the military, starting fresh in civilian life where her reputation wouldn't follow her. But she couldn't bring herself to abandon the service that had given her life meaning, even if that service was destroying her reputation. She believed that her duty to protect classified information was more important than her own comfort or career advancement. As the years passed, Sarah learned to live with the constant suspicion and hostility. She developed a thick skin, a quiet dignity, and a determination to continue serving her country regardless of what people thought about her. She knew that someday, somehow, the truth might come out. But even if it never did, she would continue to honor her oath to protect national security, no matter the personal cost. What Sarah didn't know was that Colonel Hayes had been watching her situation from afar, monitoring how she handled the pressure and the accusations. The colonel was impressed by Sarah's integrity, her commitment to protecting classified information, and her ability to endure personal humiliation for the sake of national security. These were exactly the qualities that the program needed in its agents. But Colonel Hayes also knew that Sarah's situation was becoming unsustainable. The constant suspicion and hostility were taking their toll, and there was a risk that Sarah might eventually break under the pressure. Something would need to be done, but it would require careful planning and the approval of people at the highest levels of government. The solution, when it came, would be more dramatic than anyone could have anticipated. But that would come later, after Sarah had endured 3 more years of accusations, investigations, and professional isolation. For now, she simply continued to serve, to stay silent, and to protect the secrets that had cost her everything. 3 years had passed since the rumors about Sarah's alleged special operations experience had first surfaced. During that time, she had been transferred 5 times, investigated 4 times, and subjected to countless informal inquiries from suspicious colleagues. Each new assignment brought the same pattern: initial curiosity, growing suspicion, formal complaints, and eventual hostility. Sarah's current assignment was at Naval Air Station Lemoore in California's Central Valley. The base was home to several fighter squadrons and had a reputation for being a place where careers were either made or broken. For Sarah, it was looking more like the latter with each passing day. Her immediate supervisor was Lieutenant Commander Bradley Morrison, a career officer who prided himself on running a tight ship and maintaining the highest standards of military discipline. Morrison had received Sarah's file before her arrival, and he had read every report, every investigation summary, and every negative evaluation that had followed her from base to base. Morrison was convinced that Sarah was a fraud, and he made no effort to hide his opinion. During their first meeting, he had looked her straight in the eye and said, "I don't know what game you're playing, Mitchell, but it ends here. I've read your file, I know about your claims, and I'm telling you right now that I won't tolerate stolen valor in my command." Sarah had simply nodded and replied, "I understand, sir. I'll perform my duties to the best of my ability." But Morrison wasn't satisfied with her acquiescence. He was determined to expose what he saw as her deception, and he began to make her life as difficult as possible. He assigned her to the most mundane tasks, excluded her from important meetings, and made it clear to everyone in the unit that she was not to be trusted or respected. The other sailors in Sarah's unit quickly picked up on Morrison's attitude and began treating her with suspicion and hostility. They would stop talking when she entered a room, exclude her from social gatherings, and make pointed comments about the importance of honesty and integrity in the military. The worst part was the way some of her colleagues would test her knowledge, trying to catch her in contradictions or expose gaps in her supposed special operations background. They would ask detailed questions about SEAL training, specific missions, or classified procedures, hoping to prove that she was lying about her experience. Sarah handled these interrogations with the same quiet dignity she had maintained for 3 years. She would simply say, "I can't discuss operational matters," or "that information is classified." Her responses only fueled more suspicion, as people interpreted her refusal to provide details as evidence that she had no details to provide. One particular incident stands out from this period. During a unit meeting about security procedures, one of Sarah's colleagues, Petty Officer First Class Robert Jenkins, decided to publicly challenge her credibility. Jenkins was a respected member of the unit who had served multiple tours in Iraq and Afghanistan with conventional forces. "You know, Mitchell," Jenkins said, interrupting the briefing, "I've been thinking about your supposed special ops background. If you really did what you claim to have done, you'd have some pretty specific knowledge about certain procedures and protocols. So why don't you enlighten us?" The room fell silent as everyone waited for Sarah's response. Morrison made no effort to intervene, clearly interested in seeing how she would handle the challenge. Sarah felt the weight of every person's stare, knowing that anything she said would either compromise classified information or provide further ammunition for her critics. "I can't discuss operational procedures, Petty Officer Jenkins," Sarah replied calmly. "I'm sure you understand the importance of operational security." Jenkins laughed and several other people in the room joined him. Operational security? You mean covering up your lies? Come on, Mitchell, we all know you're full of it. Just admit it, and we can all move on. Sarah remained calm, but inside she was screaming. She wanted to tell them about the terrorists she had helped capture, about the attacks she had helped prevent, about the nights she had spent in hostile territory wondering if she would live to see morning. But she couldn't say any of that without violating her oath and potentially compromising ongoing operations. I've given you my answer, Petty Officer Jenkins, Sarah said quietly. I won't be discussing this matter further. Morrison finally intervened, but not to defend Sarah. All right, that's enough, he said. But Jenkins raises valid concerns. Mitchell, your presence here is disruptive, and your refusal to address these allegations directly is causing problems for unit morale. I'm going to recommend that you be transferred again, and I'll be including my concerns about your credibility in my evaluation. After the meeting, Sarah returned to her quarters and sat alone in the dark, wondering how much longer she could endure this treatment. She had sacrificed everything for her country, her reputation, her relationships, her peace of mind, and she was beginning to wonder if it had been worth it. What made the situation even more painful was that Sarah genuinely admired the people who were accusing her of stolen valor. They were good sailors, dedicated service members who had earned their achievements through hard work and sacrifice. She understood their anger at what they perceived as false claims to military honors, because she felt the same anger when she encountered actual cases of stolen valor. But there was nothing she could do to defend herself without breaking the oath that meant more to her than her own comfort. So she endured the suspicion, the hostility, and the isolation, knowing that the truth was more important than her reputation. Meanwhile, Colonel Hayes had been monitoring Sarah's situation through carefully placed contacts throughout the Navy. The colonel received regular reports about Sarah's treatment, her performance evaluations, and the ongoing controversy surrounding her alleged special operations background. Hayes was impressed by Sarah's continued silence and professionalism under extremely difficult circumstances. Most people would have broken under the pressure by now, either revealing classified information to defend themselves or leaving the military entirely. But Sarah continued to serve with quiet dignity, protecting national security even at enormous personal cost. However, Hayes was also growing concerned about the sustainability of the situation. The constant stress and isolation were taking their toll on Sarah, and there were signs that her psychological well-being was beginning to suffer. More importantly, the controversy surrounding her was making it impossible for the program to use her for future missions. The classified program that Sarah had been part of was still active and still vital to national security. The intelligence gathering techniques she and her team had pioneered were being used by other agents around the world, and the missions they had completed had established important precedents for future operations. But the program needed experienced agents who could train new recruits and lead complex missions. Sarah's skills and experience made her invaluable for these purposes, but her current situation made it impossible to use her effectively. Something would need to be done to resolve the crisis, but it would require careful planning and approval from the highest levels of government. Hayes began to develop a plan that would allow Sarah to be vindicated without compromising ongoing operations or revealing details about the classified program. It was a complex plan that would require the cooperation of multiple agencies and the approval of people who rarely involve themselves in individual cases. While Hayes worked on her plan, Sarah continued to endure the daily humiliation of serving under suspicion. Her performance evaluations were consistently negative, not because of any failure in her duties, but because of what supervisors called credibility issues and negative impact on unit morale. The pattern repeated itself with depressing regularity. Sarah would arrive at a new assignment, and within weeks, someone would hear about her alleged false claims to special operations experience. The rumors would spread, investigations would be launched, and eventually, she would be transferred again to avoid disrupting unit operations. Each transfer meant starting over completely, learning new procedures, meeting new people, and gradually earning their distrust rather than their respect. Sarah began to feel like she was trapped in a nightmare that would never end, constantly moving, but never escaping the reputation that followed her everywhere. The psychological impact was severe. Sarah found herself becoming increasingly isolated, even when she wasn't being actively shunned by her colleagues. She stopped trying to form friendships, stopped participating in social activities, and focused solely on performing her official duties as perfectly as possible. Sleep became difficult as Sarah's mind would race with thoughts about her situation. She would lie awake wondering if she had made the right choices, if her sacrifice was really worth it, and if there would ever be an end to the suspicion and hostility that had become her constant companions. There were moments when Sarah considered revealing enough classified information to vindicate herself, even though she knew it would result in her court-martial and imprisonment. The temptation was particularly strong during the most humiliating encounters, when colleagues would openly mock her or question her integrity in front of others. But every time she considered breaking her oath, Sarah would think about the other agents who were still in the field, risking their lives on missions that depended on maintaining the secrecy of the program. She would think about the intelligence that had been gathered through her sacrifices and the lives that had been saved because of it, and she would recommit herself to protecting those secrets, no matter the personal cost. One particularly difficult incident occurred during a base-wide ceremony honoring sailors who had been decorated for valor. As the honorees were recognized for their courage and sacrifice, Sarah couldn't help but think about her own unrecognized service. She had risked her life multiple times, had gathered intelligence that saved thousands of lives, and had demonstrated courage under the most dangerous circumstances. But none of it could be acknowledged, none of it could be celebrated, and none of it mattered in terms of her official record. After the ceremony, as Sarah was walking back to her quarters, she overheard two sailors discussing the honorees. One of them mentioned how inspiring it was to see real heroes being recognized for their service. The other sailor responded, "Yeah, it's great to see actual heroes, not like that fraud Mitchell who thinks she's some kind of special ops superstar." The comment hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had spent years protecting secrets that could never be revealed, enduring humiliation and isolation to protect national security, and this was how her service was perceived, as fraud, as stolen valor, as desperate tension-seeking behavior. That night, Sarah wrote a letter to her father, though she never sent it. In the letter, she tried to explain why she couldn't defend herself against the accusations, why she had to endure the suspicion and hostility, and why her service required her to sacrifice her own reputation for the greater good. "I know you taught me to always stand up for myself and to never let anyone question my integrity," she wrote. "But sometimes the most honorable thing you can do is to let people think the worst of you, if that's what it takes to protect something more important than your own reputation. I hope someday you'll understand why I made the choices I did, and I hope you'll be proud of me even if the world never knows the truth." Sarah folded the letter and put it away with dozens of others she had written but never sent. She couldn't explain the truth to her father any more than she could explain it to her accusers. The secrets she protected were more important than her own relationships, her own comfort, and her own peace of mind. As the months passed, Sarah's situation continued to deteriorate. The constant stress was affecting her health. Her performance evaluations were becoming increasingly negative, and there were rumors that the Navy was considering administrative discharge proceedings against her. The irony was that Sarah was actually an excellent sailor when evaluated solely on her technical competence and professional behavior. Her work was always completed on time, and to the highest standards, she never missed assignments or violated regulations, and she maintained perfect military bearing even under the most difficult circumstances. But her superiors consistently rated her poorly because of what they called leadership deficiencies and negative impact on unit cohesion. These evaluations made it clear that her career was effectively over, regardless of her actual competence or dedication. Sarah began to realize that she might need to make a choice between continuing her military service and maintaining her psychological well-being. The constant stress and isolation were taking their toll, and she wasn't sure how much longer she could endure the treatment she was receiving. But just as Sarah was beginning to consider leaving the military, events were set in motion that would change everything. Colonel Hayes had finally received approval for her plan to resolve Sarah's situation, and the wheels were beginning to turn that would lead to a dramatic revelation. The plan would require perfect timing, careful coordination, and the cooperation of people at the highest levels of government. But if it worked, it would not only vindicate Sarah, but also send a powerful message about the sacrifices made by people who serve in programs that can never be acknowledged. What Hayes didn't anticipate was that the plan would also expose vulnerabilities in the classified program that would require significant changes to protect future agents. The revelation of Sarah's true service would solve one problem, but create several others that would take years to resolve. For now, though, Sarah continued her daily routine of enduring suspicion and hostility while maintaining perfect military discipline. She had no idea that help was coming, no knowledge of the plan being developed to vindicate her, and no reason to believe that her situation would ever improve. All she could do was continue to serve with honor and dignity, protecting the secrets that had cost her everything, and hoping that someday, somehow, the truth would matter more than the lies that had defined her reputation. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in October, during what should have been a routine safety briefing at Naval Air Station Lemoore. Sarah had been at the base for 8 months, and the pattern of suspicion and hostility had become her normal existence. She had learned to navigate the daily humiliation with quiet dignity, but the constant stress was wearing her down in ways that were becoming harder to hide. The briefing was being conducted by Chief Petty Officer Michael Torres, a respected senior enlisted sailor who had served with distinction for over 15 years. Torres was known for his professionalism and fairness, but he had also heard all the rumors about Sarah's alleged false claims to special operations experience. As Torres was discussing safety protocols for aircraft maintenance, Petty Officer Jenkins raised his hand. Sarah immediately tensed, recognizing the look in Jenkins's eyes that meant another public challenge was coming. "Chief," Jenkins said, "since we're talking about safety and following proper procedures, maybe this is a good time to address the elephant in the room. We got someone in our unit who claims to have special operations experience, but her record shows nothing but regular Navy service. How can we trust someone to follow safety protocols when she can't even be honest about her own background?" The room fell silent. Every person in the briefing turned to look at Sarah, who sat in the back row with perfect military posture, her face carefully neutral despite the knot of anxiety in her stomach. Chief Torres looked uncomfortable. He clearly didn't want to turn a safety briefing into a public confrontation, but he also couldn't ignore the question that had been raised. "Petty Officer Jenkins, this isn't the appropriate forum for that discussion." But Jenkins wasn't finished. He had been building up to this moment for months, and he wasn't going to let it pass. "With all due respect, Chief, I think it is appropriate. We're talking about trust and integrity, and we've got someone in our unit who's been lying about her service for years. When are we going to stop pretending this isn't a problem?" Other sailors began to murmur their agreement. Sarah could feel the hostility in the room building like a storm, and she knew that this time would be different from the other confrontations she had endured. This time, the anger was too focused, too intense, and too public for her to simply wait it out. "You know what I think?" said Seaman Apprentice Kelly Rodriguez, a young sailor who had recently joined the unit. "I think she's not just lying about special ops. I think her whole service record is fake. How do we know she didn't buy her ribbons online? How do we know any of her qualifications are real?" The accusations were getting more serious and more personal. Sarah had endured 3 years of people questioning her alleged special operations claims, but Now they were questioning her entire service record, her basic qualifications, and her right to wear the uniform at all. Chief Torres tried to regain control of the briefing. All right, that's enough. We're here to discuss safety procedures, not to conduct a witch hunt. If anyone has specific concerns about another sailor's qualifications, there are proper channels for addressing those concerns. But the dam had broken. Years of accumulated suspicion and resentment were pouring out, and there was no stopping it now. Sailor after sailor began voicing their doubts about Sarah's credibility, their anger about what they saw as stolen valor, and their belief that she was disgracing the uniform they all wore with pride. Sarah sat through it all in silence, maintaining perfect military bearing even as her world collapsed around her. She wanted to scream, to tell them the truth about the mission she had completed, about the intelligence she had gathered, about the nights she had spent in hostile territory wondering if she would live to see morning. But her oath to protect classified information was stronger than her desire to defend herself. Finally, Chief Torres called an end to the briefing and dismissed everyone except Sarah. When the room had emptied, he turned to face her with an expression that was part sympathy and part frustration. "Mitchell," he said quietly, "I've been in the Navy for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like this. I don't know what the truth is about your background, but I know that this situation is destroying unit cohesion and affecting everyone's ability to do their jobs." Sarah looked at him steadily. "I understand, Chief. What do you need me to do?" Torres sighed. "I need you to either set the record straight once and for all, or I need you to request a transfer. This can't continue." "I can't discuss operational matters, Chief," Sarah replied, using the same response she had given hundreds of times before. "And I won't request a transfer. I'll serve wherever the Navy assigns me." Torres studied her face, looking for some sign of deception or uncertainty. What he saw was a sailor who maintained perfect military bearing under impossible circumstances, who performed her duties flawlessly despite constant harassment, and who possessed a quiet strength that reminded him of the most dedicated service members he had ever known. "You know what, Mitchell?" Torres said finally. "I don't know what your story is, but I've been watching you for 8 months. I've seen how you handle pressure, how you maintain your professionalism, and how you continue to do excellent work despite everything that's been thrown at you. Whatever the truth is, you're a good sailor." It was the first expression of respect Sarah had received from a superior officer in 3 years, and it almost broke her composure. She felt tears threatening to form in her eyes, but she blinked them back and maintained her military bearing. "Thank you, Chief," she said quietly. "That means more to me than you know." But Chief Torres's support couldn't protect Sarah from what happened next. Within hours of the briefing, word had spread throughout the base about the public confrontation and the serious questions that had been raised about Sarah's qualifications. By evening, the story had reached the attention of the base commander, Captain Richard Morrison, Lieutenant Commander Morrison's uncle, and a man who had built his career on maintaining the highest standards of military discipline. Captain Morrison had heard about Sarah's situation when she first arrived at the base, but he had been content to let his nephew handle what he assumed was a minor personnel issue. Now, with the controversy becoming public and affecting base operations, he decided that direct action was required. Sarah was summoned to the captain's office the next morning. She reported as ordered, standing at attention in front of his desk while Captain Morrison reviewed her file and the reports about the previous day's incident. "Lieutenant Mitchell," Captain Morrison said without looking up, "I've been reading about your situation, and I have to say that I'm troubled by what I've found. You've been the subject of multiple investigations, numerous complaints, and now public confrontations that are affecting the good order and discipline of this command." "Yes, sir," Sarah replied, keeping her eyes fixed on a point on the wall behind the captain's head. "What I can't understand," Morrison continued, "is why you continue to maintain this charade. Your record shows no special operations training, no SEAL qualifications, and no indication that you've ever been involved in classified operations. Yet you refuse to deny these allegations, and your silence is being interpreted as confirmation that you're engaged in stolen valor. Sarah felt the familiar weight of the impossible choice she faced every time this conversation occurred. She could either reveal classified information to defend herself, which would result in her court-martial and imprisonment, or she could continue to endure the accusations and hope that somehow, someday, the truth would come out through official channels. "I can't discuss operational matters, sir," Sarah said, giving the same response she had given countless times before. Captain Morrison slammed his hand down on his desk. "Damn it, Mitchell. There are no operational matters to discuss. You're a regular Navy weapons specialist who's never been involved in anything more classified than routine maintenance procedures. This isn't about operational security. This is about stolen valor and the damage you're doing to the reputation of this command." The accusation hit Sarah like a physical blow. To be accused of stolen valor was to be accused of dishonoring the service and sacrifice of real heroes, and it was the one charge that hurt more than all the others combined. She had risked her life for her country, had sacrificed everything to protect national security, and now she was being accused of falsely claiming honors she had never earned. But what made the accusation even more painful was that Sarah genuinely respected the SEALs and would never want to dishonor their achievements. She knew that real SEALs had earned their trident through some of the most difficult training in the military, and she understood why they were offended by false claims to their accomplishments. "Sir," Sarah said quietly, "I have never claimed to be a Navy SEAL. I have never claimed to have completed SEAL training. I have never claimed to have earned a SEAL trident. If people have interpreted my comments to mean those things, then I apologize for any misunderstanding." Captain Morrison studied her carefully. "But you have suggested that you have special operations experience, haven't you? You've hinted at classified missions and dangerous assignments that don't appear anywhere in your official record." Sarah felt the familiar trap closing around her. Any answer she gave would either compromise classified information or provide further ammunition for her accusers. "I can't discuss operational matters, sir." "There you go again." Morrison exploded. "There are no operational matters. You're living in a fantasy, Mitchell, and it's affecting everyone around you. I'm ordering you to undergo a psychological evaluation to determine if you're fit for continued military service." The order for a psychological evaluation was devastating. It would mean that Sarah's mental stability was being officially questioned, which would become part of her permanent record and would effectively end any chance of career advancement or meaningful assignments. But there was something even worse about the evaluation. It would require Sarah to discuss her psychological state and her reasons for maintaining her position about her service record. The psychologist would probe her motivations, her beliefs, and her understanding of reality, and Sarah would have to find a way to convince them that she was mentally stable without revealing the classified information that explained her behavior. "Understand, sir," Sarah said, maintaining her military bearing despite the devastating blow she had just received. After leaving the captain's office, Sarah returned to her quarters and sat alone in the dark, contemplating her situation. The psychological evaluation would be conducted by Dr. Amanda Reeves, a civilian contractor who specialized in military psychology and had the security clearance necessary to discuss classified matters if needed. But Sarah knew that even Dr. Reeves wouldn't have the clearance level necessary to discuss the program Sarah had been part of. The psychological evaluation would be based on incomplete information, and there's a real possibility that Dr. Reeves would conclude that Sarah was delusional or mentally unstable. That evening, Sarah did something she had never done in 3 years of enduring accusations and humiliation. She called Colonel Hayes. It was a violation of protocol to make contact outside of official channels, but Sarah was facing the end of her military career and possibly her freedom if the psychological evaluation went badly. The conversation was brief and carefully worded, with both women aware that the call might be monitored. Sarah simply said that her situation had become critical and that she needed guidance about how to proceed. Colonel Hayes listened without commenting, then said, "I understand your concerns. Continue to follow your oath and maintain operational security. Help is coming. It was the first indication Sarah had received in 3 years that anyone in authority was aware of her situation or concerned about her welfare. The knowledge that help might be coming gave her the strength to face the psychological evaluation with some degree of hope. The evaluation took place over 3 sessions in Dr. Reeves's office at the Base Medical Center. Dr. Reeves was a professional, thorough psychologist who approached Sarah's case with genuine curiosity about what was driving her behavior. Lieutenant Mitchell, Dr. Reeves said during their first session, "I've reviewed your file and the reports about your situation. What I'm trying to understand is why you continue to maintain a position that's causing you so much personal and professional damage. Can you help me understand your thinking?" Sarah chose her words carefully. "Doctor, I believe that maintaining operational security is more important than defending myself against accusations. Some things are more important than personal comfort or reputation. But, according to your record, there are no operational security concerns related to your service," Dr. Reeves replied. "Your assignments have all been routine Navy duties with no classified components. So what operational security are you protecting?" It was the same trap that Sarah had faced hundreds of times, but now the stakes were even higher. If she couldn't convince Dr. Reeves that she was mentally stable and acting rationally, she would be discharged from the military and possibly committed for psychiatric treatment. "Doctor," Sarah said carefully, "I can't discuss specific operational matters, but I can tell you that my commitment to maintaining operational security is based on real concerns about national security, not delusions or fantasy." Dr. Reeves made notes and asked follow-up questions, probing Sarah's understanding of reality and her ability to distinguish between fact and fiction. The sessions were exhausting and emotionally draining, as Sarah had to defend her mental stability without being able to explain the real reasons for her behavior. After 3 sessions, Dr. Reeves submitted her report to Captain Morrison. The report would determine whether Sarah was fit for continued military service or whether she would be discharged and possibly institutionalized. Sarah waited for the results with growing anxiety, knowing that her entire future depended on the opinion of a psychologist who had been forced to evaluate her based on incomplete information. She had done everything possible to convince Dr. Reeves that she was mentally stable and acting rationally, but she wasn't sure if it had been enough. What Sarah didn't know was that while she was undergoing her psychological evaluation, Colonel Hayes was putting the finishing touches on a plan that would resolve her situation once and for all. The plan had been approved at the highest levels of government and would soon be put into action. The revelation would come during a routine staff meeting at Naval Air Station Lemoore, in front of the same people who had spent years questioning Sarah's credibility and accusing her of stolen valor. It would be dramatic, definitive, and would change everything that people thought they knew about the quiet sailor who had endured 3 years of accusations and humiliation. But for now, Sarah could only wait and hope that Dr. Reeves would conclude that she was mentally fit for continued service, even if she couldn't explain the real reasons for her behavior. The psychological evaluation report would arrive soon, and with it would come either vindication or the end of everything Sarah had worked for in her military career. Dr. Amanda Reeves submitted her psychological evaluation report on a Friday afternoon, and Captain Morrison received it first thing Monday morning. Sarah spent the weekend in a state of controlled anxiety, knowing that the report would determine whether her military career would continue or come to an abrupt end. The report was more complex than anyone had anticipated. Dr. Reeves had concluded that Sarah was mentally stable, rational, and fully capable of distinguishing between reality and fantasy. However, the psychologist also noted that Sarah appeared to be protecting information that she genuinely believed to be classified, even though no such classification could be verified through normal channels. Lieutenant Mitchell presents as a highly intelligent, emotionally stable individual who demonstrates exceptional integrity and commitment to what she perceives as her oath to protect classified information, Dr. Reeves had written. While I cannot verify the existence of the classified operation she appears to be protecting, her behavior is consistent with someone who has been trained to maintain operational security at the highest levels. The report created more questions than it answered. If Sarah was mentally stable and rational, why was she maintaining a position that was destroying her career to protect information that didn't appear to exist? Dr. Reeves had recommended that the situation be reviewed by someone with higher security clearances who might be able to verify or deny the existence of the classified operations Sarah seemed to be protecting. Captain Morrison was frustrated by the ambiguous conclusion. He had hoped for a clear determination that Sarah was either mentally stable or delusional, which would have given him a clear course of action. Instead, he was faced with a recommendation that the case be reviewed by intelligence professionals with higher clearances than anyone at his base possessed. But before Captain Morrison could decide how to proceed, he received an unexpected phone call that would change everything. The call came from Admiral Patricia Williamson, the commander of Naval Air Forces Pacific, requesting that a special briefing be scheduled for the following Tuesday at Naval Air Station Lemoore. Admiral Williamson was a three-star admiral with over 30 years of service and a reputation for being one of the most competent and respected officers in the Navy. She rarely made personal visits to individual bases unless something of extraordinary importance was involved. Captain Morrison, Admiral Williamson said during their brief phone conversation, "I need you to arrange a briefing for Tuesday morning at 0800 hours. I want all of your senior staff present, as well as Lieutenant Mitchell and anyone who has been involved in the ongoing situation regarding her service record." Morrison was puzzled by the request. "Admiral, may I ask what this briefing will cover?" "You'll find out on Tuesday, Captain," Admiral Williamson replied. "But I can tell you that it involves matters of national security that have been classified at the highest levels. Make sure Lieutenant Mitchell is present and prepared for a full discussion of her service record." After ending the call, Morrison sat back in his chair, trying to understand what was happening. An admiral was coming to his base specifically to discuss Sarah Mitchell's service record, and she was talking about matters of national security and the highest levels of classification. It didn't make sense based on anything in Sarah's file, but admirals didn't make personal visits without good reason. Morrison immediately called Lieutenant Commander Morrison, his nephew, and Chief Torres to inform them about the upcoming briefing. He also sent word to Sarah that she was required to attend a special briefing on Tuesday morning and should be prepared to discuss her service record in detail. When Sarah received the message, she felt a mixture of hope and anxiety. The mention of an admiral and high-level classification suggested that someone in authority was finally going to address her situation, but she couldn't be sure whether that would result in vindication or further humiliation. Over the weekend, word about the upcoming briefing spread throughout the base. The fact that an admiral was coming specifically to discuss Sarah's situation convinced many people that she was finally going to be exposed as a fraud and possibly court-martialed for stolen valor. Others wondered if there might be more to her story than anyone had realized. Petty Officer Jenkins was particularly vocal about his expectations for the briefing. Finally, he told anyone who would listen, "We're going to get to the bottom of this. An admiral's coming to expose her lies and hopefully throw her out of the Navy where she belongs." Chief Torres was less certain. His conversation with Sarah after the confrontational safety briefing had left him with doubts about the assumptions everyone had been making. There was something about her demeanor, her consistency under pressure, and her unwavering professionalism that suggested she might be telling the truth about something, even if it wasn't what people thought. Sarah spent the weekend preparing for what might be the most important briefing of her life. She reviewed her understanding of what information she could and couldn't discuss, knowing that she would need to be careful not to reveal classified details, even if she was finally given permission to defend herself. On Monday evening, Sarah received a visitor at her quarters. Colonel Patricia Hayes had arrived at the base and requested a private meeting before the next morning's briefing. It was the first time Sarah had seen the colonel in over 3 years, and the reunion was emotional for both women. "Sarah," Colonel Hayes said as they sat in Sarah's small quarters, "I want you to know that I've been monitoring your situation from the beginning. I've seen how you've handled the pressure, the accusations, and the isolation, and I want you to know that your dedication to protecting operational security has been noted at the highest levels." Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. For 3 years, she had wondered if anyone in authority knew about her situation or cared about what she was enduring. Now she finally had confirmation that her sacrifices had been noticed and appreciated. "Colonel," Sarah said, "I need to know if I'm finally going to be able to tell the truth tomorrow. This situation has been destroying my career and my reputation, and I don't know how much longer I can endure it." Hayes nodded sympathetically. "Tomorrow, you'll be able to tell part of the truth. We've received approval to reveal some aspects of your service, enough to vindicate you and establish your credibility. But there are still operational details that will need to remain classified." "What about the program?" Sarah asked. "Will people finally learn about what we did and why it was important?" "Some people will learn about it," Hayes replied. "The people at tomorrow's briefing will be briefed on the general nature of the program and your role in it. But the specific details of your missions and the current status of ongoing operations will remain classified." Hayes went on to explain that the revelation would be carefully controlled and limited to the people who needed to know. Sarah would be vindicated, her reputation would be restored, and she would finally receive recognition for her service. But the full truth about the program would continue to be protected at the highest levels of classification. That night, Sarah slept better than she had in 3 years. For the first time since the rumors about her service had first surfaced, she would be able to defend herself with facts instead of evasions. She would finally be able to explain why she had endured years of accusations and humiliation rather than revealing classified information. Tuesday morning arrived with perfect California weather, but the atmosphere at Naval Air Station Lemoore was tense with anticipation. Admiral Williamson had arrived the night before and had spent several hours in private meetings with Captain Morrison and other senior officers, preparing them for what they were about to learn. The briefing was scheduled for the base's main conference room, and by 0800 hours, all the key participants had assembled. Admiral Williamson sat at the head of the table, with Colonel Hayes beside her. Captain Morrison and his senior staff occupied one side of the table, while Sarah sat across from them with Chief Torres and several other sailors who had been involved in the controversy. Petty Officer Jenkins was present, as were Seaman Rodriguez and several other sailors who had been vocal in their accusations against Sarah. They sat with expressions of confident anticipation, certain that they were about to witness Sarah's final exposure and disgrace. Admiral Williamson began the briefing with a sober tone that immediately commanded attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, you're here today because you've been involved in a situation that has had serious implications for both individual lives and national security. What I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels, and you'll all be required to sign non-disclosure agreements before leaving this room." The mention of national security and non-disclosure agreements caused a ripple of surprise through the room. This wasn't what anyone had expected from what they thought would be a straightforward case of stolen valor. For the past 3 years, Admiral Williamson continued, Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell has been subjected to accusations of stolen valor, claims that she has falsely represented her military service, and suggestions that she is mentally unstable or deliberately deceptive. These accusations have damaged her career, her reputation, and her psychological well-being. Jenkins shifted uncomfortably in his seat, beginning to realize that this briefing might not go the way he had expected. Admiral Williamson's tone suggested that Sarah was about to be vindicated rather than exposed. "What you don't know," the Admiral continued, "is that Lieutenant Mitchell has been protecting classified information about her service that could not be revealed without compromising ongoing operations and endangering the lives of other service members. Her refusal to defend herself against your accusations has been an act of extraordinary patriotism and personal sacrifice." The room fell completely silent as the implications of the Admiral's words sank in. If what she was saying was true, then everyone who had accused Sarah of stolen valor had been wrong, and their treatment of her had been not only unjust, but also ignorant of her real service and sacrifice. Admiral Williamson nodded to Colonel Hayes, who stood up and began to address the room with the authority of someone who had spent her entire career managing the nation's most sensitive operations. Lieutenant Mitchell was selected 3.5 years ago for a classified program that required her to operate under deep cover in hostile territories, Colonel Hayes said. She underwent 18 months of intensive training in languages, cultural practices, and combat techniques that went far beyond anything taught in conventional military programs. The colonel went on to describe, in general terms, the nature of the program and Sarah's role in it. She explained how Sarah and her team had been inserted into hostile territories under assumed identities, how they had gathered intelligence that prevented terrorist attacks and saved thousands of lives, and how their missions had been so sensitive that all records of their service had been classified at levels that most military personnel would never have access to. Lieutenant Mitchell completed 4 classified missions over a period of 2 years, Colonel Hayes continued. She operated independently in Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, and Somalia, gathering intelligence that was vital to national security. Her work directly led to the prevention of 3 major terrorist attacks and the capture of dozens of high-value targets. As Colonel Hayes spoke, the faces of the people in the room began to change. The confident expressions of Sarah's accusers were replaced by looks of shock, embarrassment, and growing understanding of what they had done to an innocent person. When Lieutenant Mitchell returned to conventional Navy duties, Hayes continued. She was required to maintain the fiction that her service record contained only routine assignments. The success of ongoing operations and the safety of other agents depended on maintaining the secrecy of the program she had been part of. Chief Torres looked across the table at Sarah with a new understanding of what he had witnessed over the past 8 months. Her quiet dignity under pressure, her refusal to defend herself even when falsely accused, and her unwavering professionalism suddenly made perfect sense. She hadn't been protecting a lie. She had been protecting secrets that were vital to national security. Jenkins was staring at Sarah with an expression of horror as he realized what he had done. For 3 years, he had been one of her most vocal accusers, publicly challenging her credibility and encouraging others to view her as a fraud. Now he was learning that she was actually a hero who had risked her life for her country and had sacrificed her reputation to protect ongoing operations. Admiral Williamson took over the briefing again, her voice carrying a tone of unmistakable authority. What happened to Lieutenant Mitchell over the past 3 years represents a failure of the system that was supposed to protect her while she protected classified information. She should never have been put in a position where she had to choose between defending herself and maintaining operational security. The Admiral went on to explain that new procedures were being implemented to prevent similar situations in the future, and that Sarah would be receiving recognition for her service that had been long overdue. She would be awarded several commendations for her classified missions, promoted to lieutenant commander, and given the opportunity to continue serving in either conventional assignments or classified programs. But more than that, Admiral Williamson said, looking directly at the people who had accused Sarah, Lieutenant Mitchell deserves apologies from everyone who questioned her integrity without having the facts. She has demonstrated courage, sacrifice, and dedication to duty that exemplifies the very best of military service. The briefing concluded with the signing of non-disclosure agreements and individual meetings with Admiral Williamson and Colonel Hayes to discuss the implications of what had been revealed. Sarah was asked to remain behind for a private conversation with the 2 senior officers. When the room had cleared except for the 3 women, Admiral Williamson turned to Sarah with an expression of profound respect and regret. Lieutenant Mitchell, on behalf of the United States Navy and everyone who failed to protect you during this ordeal, I want to apologize. You should never have been put in this position, and you should never have had to endure what you've experienced over the past 3 years. Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes for the first time since her ordeal had begun. After 3 years of silence, isolation, and accusations, she was finally being acknowledged for her service and sacrifice. "Thank you, Admiral," Sarah said quietly. "I won't pretend it hasn't been difficult, but I knew that protecting the program and the other agents was more important than my own comfort. I just hoped that what we accomplished was worth the cost." Colonel Hayes placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Sarah, I want you to know that your sacrifice hasn't been in vain. The intelligence you gathered has continued to be valuable. The techniques you helped develop are being used to protect American lives around the world, and your example of integrity under pressure has inspired changes that will protect future agents." The conversation continued for another hour, as Admiral Williamson and Colonel Hayes briefed Sarah on her new options and the recognition she would receive. For the first time in 3 years, Sarah's future looked bright, and she could finally begin to imagine a military career that wasn't defined by suspicion and accusations. But as satisfying as the vindication was, Sarah knew that the real test would come in the days and weeks ahead as she tried to rebuild relationships with the people who had spent years viewing her as a fraud and a disgrace to the uniform they all wore with pride. The immediate aftermath of the briefing was unlike anything Sarah had experienced in 3 years. As she walked across the base that afternoon, she noticed people stopping their conversations to stare at her, but for the first time, the stares carried respect rather than suspicion. Word of the briefing had spread quickly through the command, and everyone now knew that the woman they had branded as a fraud was actually a decorated intelligence operative who had risked her life for her country. Chief Torres was the first to approach Sarah after the briefing. He found her in the mess hall, eating lunch alone as she had done for months, and asked if he could join her. When she nodded, he sat down across from her with an expression of deep remorse. "Lieutenant," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology that I don't even know how to begin. For 8 months, I watched you endure treatment that no sailor should ever have to face, and I didn't do enough to stop it. Now I understand why you couldn't defend yourself, and I'm ashamed of how I failed to protect you." Sarah looked at the man who had been one of her few sources of support during her darkest period. "Chief, you treated me with more respect than most people did. You saw that I was a good sailor, even when you didn't understand my situation. That meant more to me than you know." Torres shook his head. "But I should have done more. I should have stood up to the people who were attacking you, should have insisted that they treat you with basic military courtesy regardless of their doubts about your background. Instead, I let unit politics override my duty to protect a fellow sailor." The conversation with Chief Torres was repeated dozens of times over the next few days, as people who had participated in Sarah's persecution came to apologize for their treatment of her. Some of the apologies were sincere expressions of remorse, while others seemed motivated more by embarrassment at being on the wrong side of a dramatic revelation. The most difficult conversation came with Petty Officer Jenkins, who requested a private meeting with Sarah 3 days after the briefing. Jenkins had been Sarah's most vocal accuser, the person who had led the charge in questioning her credibility and encouraging others to view her as a fraud. When they met in Chief Torres's office, Jenkins appeared to have aged years in just 3 days. His confident demeanor had been replaced by obvious shame and regret, and he struggled to make eye contact with Sarah as he began to speak. "Lieutenant," Jenkins said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I don't know how to apologize for what I did to you. For 3 years, I led the campaign against you. I questioned your integrity, called you a liar, and encouraged others to treat you like a criminal. And all the time, you were protecting secrets that could have gotten people killed if they were revealed." Sarah listened without interrupting, allowing Jenkins to express the remorse that was clearly eating at him. She had learned during her classified missions that understanding people's motivations was often more important than judging their actions. "I thought I was defending the honor of the military," Jenkins continued. "I thought I was protecting the reputation of real heroes from someone who was trying to steal their glory. I convinced myself that I was doing the right thing, that I was standing up for truth and integrity." "You were defending what you believed in," Sarah replied. Your mistake wasn't in caring about military honor. It was in assuming you had all the facts when you actually had very few of them. Jenkins looked up at her with surprise. He had expected anger, condemnation, or at least cold indifference. Instead, Sarah was responding with understanding and even compassion for his position. "How can you not hate me?" Jenkins asked. "I made your life hell for 3 years. I publicly humiliated you, questioned your sanity, and tried to get you thrown out of the military. If someone had done that to me, I'd want to destroy them." Sarah was quiet for a moment, thinking about all the anger and resentment she could have harbored against the people who had made her life so difficult. But she had learned during her classified missions that holding on to anger was a luxury that people in her position couldn't afford. Hatred would have made the last 3 years even harder than they already were, Sarah said finally. "I had to choose between being angry at all of you or focusing on protecting the information I was sworn to protect. I chose to focus on my duty because that was the only way I could get through each day." The conversation with Jenkins marked a turning point in Sarah's relationship with her colleagues. Her willingness to forgive the people who had persecuted her, combined with the dramatic revelation of her true service, transformed her from a pariah into something approaching a legend within the command. But Sarah was uncomfortable with the hero worship that began to develop around her. People who had ignored her for years suddenly wanted to hear stories about her missions, to learn details about her training, and to bask in the reflected glory of having served alongside a real spy. Captain Morrison, who had ordered Sarah's psychological evaluation and had been one of her harshest critics, found himself in the awkward position of having to completely reevaluate his assessment of her character and service. During a private meeting in his office, he attempted to apologize for his treatment of her. "Lieutenant Commander Mitchell," he said, using her new rank for the first time, "I want you to know that my actions were based on the information available to me at the time. If I had known the truth about your service, I would never have questioned your integrity or ordered that psychological evaluation." Sarah appreciated the apology, but she also understood that Captain Morrison's actions had been entirely reasonable based on the information he had possessed. From his perspective, he had been dealing with a sailor who appeared to be making false claims about her service record, and his response had been appropriate for that situation. "Captain," Sarah replied, "you were doing your job based on the information you had. The failure wasn't in your response to my situation. It was in the system that put me in an impossible position without providing you with the context you needed to understand what was really happening." The promotion ceremony for Sarah's advancement to lieutenant commander was held 2 weeks after the briefing, and it was attended by many of the same people who had spent years questioning her credibility. Admiral Williamson personally presided over the ceremony, and her remarks made it clear that Sarah's promotion was not just recognition for her past service, but also an indication of the Navy's confidence in her future potential. "Lieutenant Commander Mitchell represents the very best of what we strive for in naval service," Admiral Williamson said during the ceremony. "She has demonstrated courage under fire, integrity under pressure, and loyalty to her oath even when that loyalty required personal sacrifice. The Navy is stronger because of her service, and we are honored to have her as part of our team." After the ceremony, Sarah was approached by Colonel Hayes with an offer that would shape the next phase of her career. The classified program she had been part of was being reorganized and expanded, and they needed experienced operatives to train new agents and lead complex missions. "Sarah," Colonel Hayes said during a private meeting, "you've proven that you have the skills, the integrity, and the psychological strength to succeed in this program. We'd like you to consider returning to classified operations, either as a field agent or as an instructor for new recruits." It was an attractive offer. Sarah would be returning to the work she was best at, serving alongside people who understood the nature of classified operations and the sacrifices they required. She would never again have to worry about protecting secrets from colleagues who didn't have the clearance to understand her real service. But Sarah had also learned something important during her 3 years of persecution. She had discovered that she was stronger than she had ever imagined, that she could endure almost anything as long as she remained true to her principles, and that the respect of her peers was less important than the knowledge that she was serving her country to the best of her ability. "Colonel," Sarah said after considering the offer, "I appreciate the confidence you're showing in me, and I'm honored by the opportunity. But I think I can serve the Navy best by staying in conventional assignments, at least for now. The experience I've had over the past 3 years has given me insights that could be valuable in regular Navy operations." Hayes was surprised by Sarah's decision. Most people who had proven themselves in classified programs preferred to continue working in that environment rather than returning to conventional military duties. But she also understood Sarah's reasoning and respected her choice. "If you change your mind," Hayes said, "the door will always be open. The program needs people like you, and there will always be a place for you if you decide to return to classified operations." Sarah's decision to remain in conventional Navy service proved to be prescient. Her experience with classified operations, combined with her demonstrated ability to handle pressure and maintain operational security, made her a valuable asset in regular assignments. She was given increasingly responsible positions and quickly established a reputation as one of the most competent and trustworthy officers in her field. More importantly, Sarah became a mentor and advocate for other sailors who found themselves in difficult situations. Her experience with false accusations and unjust treatment made her sensitive to the challenges faced by people who couldn't defend themselves through normal channels. 6 months after her vindication, Sarah was approached by a young petty officer named Maria Santos, who was facing accusations of improper conduct that she couldn't address without compromising an ongoing investigation. Santos had heard about Sarah's experience and hoped that she might understand her situation. "Ma'am," Santos said during a private meeting, "I know what happened to you, and I'm hoping you might be able to help me. I'm being accused of things I didn't do, but I can't defend myself without revealing information that could compromise an investigation. I don't know how much longer I can handle the treatment I'm receiving." Sarah listened to Santos's story with growing understanding and sympathy. The specific circumstances were different, but the underlying situation was remarkably similar to what Sarah had experienced. Santos was being persecuted for protecting information that she couldn't reveal, and her colleagues were interpreting her silence as evidence of guilt. "Petty Officer Santos," Sarah said, "the most important thing you can do is to remember that your integrity is more valuable than other people's opinions of you. If you know you're doing the right thing, if you know you're protecting something important, then you can endure whatever treatment you receive from people who don't understand your situation." Sarah went on to share strategies she had developed for maintaining her psychological well-being during her 3 years of persecution. She talked about the importance of focusing on duty rather than personal recognition, about finding strength in the knowledge that her sacrifice was protecting something valuable, and about maintaining hope that eventually the truth would be revealed. But more than just offering advice, Sarah used her position and credibility too.